Hey, I'm Brendan Lorenzo, and this is how Challengers is trying to warn you. Challengers is a story where every scene is a tennis match, even if sometimes there are no balls or rackets involved.
Maybe you just wanted to see me.
I have seen you. You look like shit.
The tennis court becomes a battleground, not just for sporting glory, but to assert their very identity over one another. Creating a sometimes toxic, sometimes invigorating dynamic, where they're not allowed to be equals, but must always vie for dominance. Whether it be in the arena of sport or love. And yes, this video does contain spoilers. A once pure passion for tennis becomes a toxic vehicle for two childhood best friends, Art and Patrick, played by Mike Faist and Josh O'Connor, to fight it out for the love and adoration of the one and only Tashi Duncan, a fellow tennis prodigy played by, well, she doesn't really need an introduction, but it would be an insult not to give her one, Zendaya.
So you're saying I should be flattered?
I guess this would be referred to as a love triangle, but I think we need to use the word love loosely here. And ironically, I think the closest thing we do see to real love is in the bromance shared by the two main men. Childhood best friends who have never had any reason to fight because their interests never clashed.
We usually have different types.
But when they both want the same girl, a once fruitful relationship turns sour.
I don't matter.
Not even to the most obsessive tennis fan in the entire world.
If there's one thing that gets in between any three of these people having a healthy relationship with each other, it's their ego. When our sense of identity becomes wrapped in external circumstances, for example in the case of Tashi it's the mindset of I am a winner, then everything that happens in the world has to match that identity that we've fabricated in here, or we get pretty mad. When Tashi dislocates her knee and is unable to keep playing, she has to pivot her mindset from winning herself to winning through someone else. That someone else ends up being Art, and their relationship is doomed from the beginning because his performance on the court has now become a reflection of her worth as a person. She's afraid that if she doesn't maintain power and control over him, he'll slack off and drag her down with him. So then when he loses a match, even though it doesn't really have anything to do with her, she's deeply offended because when we tie up our own identity in the success of our partner, or anyone for that matter, we're likely to then take their failure as an insult, even though they're a fallible human being who makes mistakes, and their failure or success has nothing to do with who we are as people. Her hot and cold approval plays insidiously into Art's predominant insecurity that he's not good enough as he is and that he needs to perform to earn Tashi's love. They all do pretty reprehensible things, but we also can't totally judge them.
Even if we're very different from these characters in reality, is to accept that we are all capable of being these characters. People make mistakes. That doesn't define them.
Our egos play into all of our relationships, but especially romantic. I mean, you ideally want your partner to be someone you can proudly show off at a party or bring home to your parents, right? That's partly your ego at play, and it's okay, it's normal, but it starts to become a problem when, for example, Tashi shames Patrick for losing some tennis matches.
Well, we're dating, right? So, I don't know. It'd be a little embarrassing if you suck.
She's basically saying, if you win at tennis, you win my respect. If you lose at tennis, you lose my respect. Now, that's obviously not a very healthy foundation for a loving relationship, but let's also not ignore how useful their egos have been to a point. Her constant pressure caused Art's skills to soar, and he subsequently won a lot of tournaments and got rich doing so. That's a positive effect of their ego, right? I mean, sure, but when you have your identity founded on something as fickle and transient as being an athletic champion, you're just building a house of cards that's waiting to come toppling down. Before someone has access to Tashi's heart, they have to open the gates of her ego. And even then it's debatable if she really loves any of them.
Hey.
Yeah,
I love you.
I know.
This is made crystal clear from the start when Tashi tells them,
I will be watching your match tomorrow. Whoever wins can have my number.
All right.
love in its purest form is unconditional, but she makes it very clear from the start that her approval and affection are both extremely conditional. Patrick beats Art and gets the girl. His ego is then satiated because he's winning on and off the court, so he lets his guard down. This becomes his ultimate downfall, because when you think your natural talent is enough and you don't need to work for anything, less talented but more tenacious people are going to overtake you.
What's your problem? You always think you won before the match is over.
The legendary song producer Rick Rubin touched on this when he said,
Ego. If someone thinks that everything they do is great, they might not be willing to edit themselves enough or work hard enough.
And the one who develops over a longer period of time is the less talented but more tenacious Art. Not only does he lag behind in the game of tennis, but also in the battle for Tashi. But instead of cutting his losses and moving on, he manipulatively plants seeds of insecurity in Tashi and Patrick's relationship.
This whole thing you're doing, you're not good
I'm not
at it.
doing
It's
a thing.
stupid.
I'm just surprised that you guys are still seeing each other. That's all.
No, I'm not sure how she's thinking about all of this. I don't want you to get hurt.
This becomes the ember that burns down their relationship, and then Art is more than ready to swoop in and be the shoulder to cry on. The moment he really seals the deal is when he says to her,
Maybe you want to jump ship? Come be my assistant coach.
because what she hears is, I'll let you control me and you can keep winning tennis matches through me. He wants Tashi to mold him into whichever man she will love the most, which means everything he does is now for her approval and validation. Their codependent dynamic is set in stone the moment she becomes his coach. Now she gets paid to control him. A lot of people get it wrong when they think that being controlled by your ego means being pompous or arrogant, when for example in this case, instead of making him arrogant, Art's ego is making him behave in a submissive manner by convincing him that he needs the nurture and love of Tashi to be safe and secure. They can't allow themselves to build a relationship on love because they're too emotionally repressed for that. They need the relationship to be a codependent transactional one, to then feel a sense of control for Tashi and security for Art. However, we can never escape our humanity and our spiritual need to connect. For them, it's this repressed passion that's yearning to come out, paralleled on and off the court. Here's what the movie's screenwriter Justin Kuritzkes had to say about it.
I think there's something really erotically charged about tennis, in that it's like boxing, but where instead of trying to touch each other, you're trying not to touch each other. There's a lot of repression in that. It's almost like a Victorian novel or something. You know, there's people trying not to make contact. And yet, at the same time, it's so intense and so emotional and so physical, but so restrained. So that contrast I found really sexy.
The director, Luca Guadagnino, is well known for exploring desire in his movies. From the iconic peach scene in Call Me By Your Name, to the unabashed cannibalism in Bones and All, he hasn't shied away from exploring how what we desire, how strongly we desire it, and what we're willing to do to gain it, can shatter even our strongest relationships. This movie is sexy and exciting, but it doesn't lean on pure sex appeal. In fact, there's not one sex scene in the entire movie, which is rare to say for Luca Guadagnino. He tells us this thrilling popcorn story while also managing to say some really important stuff about our personal identity and relationship with others in a competitive and cutthroat world. And you know, I found myself rooting for all three of them at different times throughout the movie, until I finally realized they're all f***ed up. They're all suffering from their afflictions, and rooting for any of them would be missing the point.
Remember when you said you'd let me win?
That was a lifetime ago.
So, how exactly is Challenges trying to warn us? Well, I think we can boil it down to 3 main points for 3 main characters. Patrick. When you expect everything to fall in your lap without having to suffer for it, you'll be quickly overtaken by people more disciplined and more humble. Art. When you place your self-worth on the approval of others, you'll never feel like enough. Tashi. Building your identity on something as fickle as the notion of winning is a recipe for disaster. Even if you do win, that position is tenuous and you're just postponing the misery awaiting when you're inevitably knocked off your podium. This movie leaves us on a bit of an open ending when we don't get to see who won the final match. And often that annoys me because it usually feels like the writer couldn't come up with an ending, got lazy and thought, I'll just let the audience figure it out. But in this case, I actually love that we don't get to see who wins, because that's not what matters. What matters is that even for a split second, these characters manage to transcend their bullshit and connect with their higher selves. It's in those final moments that we see them really play tennis.
For about 15 seconds there, we were actually playing tennis. And we understood each other completely.
Now, it would be really nice if we could just say that they left behind their relentless pursuit of success, realized the true value of human connection, and live happily ever after. But life isn't a fairy tale, and we're all works in progress. Luca isn't going to tie a neat bow on this ending, because we don't get neat bows in real life. And even when we do, they're fleeting. We'll never be able to completely eradicate our egos, nor should we. But we can be aware of its influence, and make sure it's not calling all the shots. And that concludes my second video. I'm still super new to this, I'm figuring it out as I go along, and I appreciate you being here for the ride. If you'd like to see my first video on why No Country for Old Men is my favourite movie, you can click here to check it out. And if you don't want to miss my third video, make sure you subscribe. I'll see you then.